There is a kind of person who walks through life with a peace that seems almost unexplainable, not because their life is easy, not because they avoid suffering, not because they are naturally brave, but because something deep within them has already surrendered to God in such a way that death loses its power to terrify. Most people spend their lives resisting the idea of death, pushing it away, avoiding the subject entirely. Yet the saints, and especially Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, reveal a surprising truth. Those who love God wholeheartedly rarely fear death at all. Their peace is not denial, it is intimacy. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever noticed that fear of death grows strongest when your life feels uncertain, unanchored, or spiritually distant? And have you ever noticed that the moments you feel closest to God, truly close, fear seems to lose some of its edge? This is because death is not frightening in itself. What frightens us is the unknown, the unresolved, the unfinished. Fear comes from distance, not from destiny. Saint Margaret Mary understood this profoundly. She lived in an era of sickness, fragility, and suffering, yet she spoke of death not with dread, but with a kind of holy familiarity, as though it were not an interruption, but an arrival, not a loss, but a return. Why? Because her life was anchored in the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the devotion she was chosen to reveal to the world, a heart burning with love, a heart radiating mercy, a heart that transforms fear into trust. The person who fears death is the person who still believes they are walking toward uncertainty. The person who does not fear death is the one who knows they are walking towards someone they already love. This is the secret Margaret Mary lived. When the soul lives close to Christ, death is not a rupture, it is a continuation. This is why she said that those who consecrate themselves to the Sacred Heart will find in him a secure refuge at the hour of death. But this refuge does not appear suddenly at the final moment. It is built slowly, through a lifetime of surrender. Margaret Mary saw that the person who rarely fears death is someone who has already died 1,000 small deaths. The death of pride, the death of self-will, the death of control, the death of sin, the death of living for oneself. Each surrender prepares the soul for its final surrender. Each yes to God makes the last yes easier. This is the paradox. Those who die to themselves while living rarely fear dying when the moment comes. Margaret Mary believed that fear of death is not a spiritual failure, it is a spiritual symptom, a sign that the heart longs for deeper union, deeper healing, deeper trust. And when the heart begins to love God with increasing simplicity and vulnerability, something beautiful happens. The fear of the unknown becomes the anticipation of home. This is the kind of person who rarely fears death, and Margaret Mary will teach us why. There is a moment in the spiritual life when a profound shift occurs, not in circumstances, not in health, not in emotion, but in understanding. It is the moment when the soul realizes death is only terrifying when life is lived far from God. Let me ask you something sincerely. Have you ever noticed how fear intensifies whenever you feel spiritually distant or internally fragmented? And how that same fear softens, even slightly, when your heart returns to prayer, surrender, or trust? This pattern is not psychological, it is spiritual. Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque saw this with striking clarity during her visions of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. His heart, burning with love, revealed something few people truly believe. The closer the soul draws to Christ in life, the less it trembles before death. Why? Because fear of death is rooted not in the event, but in the heart's relationship to God. Here's what Margaret Mary understood. 1. Fear grows where love is weak. This is not condemnation, it is diagnosis. The soul that has never experienced deep intimacy with God naturally fears leaving everything familiar behind. But the soul that has tasted God's tenderness, that has rested in His mercy, that has learned to trust His heart, can sense that death is not a thief, but a threshold. Fear fades as love strengthens. 2. Fear grows where the conscience is unsettled. Margaret Mary knew that unresolved sin, unhealed wounds, and a life half surrendered create an interior tension. Death feels threatening because the heart is not yet at peace. But the soul that lives transparently before God, even if imperfect, experiences death differently. Not as judgment, as fulfillment. 3. Fear grows where control remains unbroken. The person who clings to their life fears losing it. The person who gives their life to God piece by piece discovers that nothing essential can ever be taken from them. Margaret Mary taught that the Sacred Heart slowly dismantles the illusion of control, freeing the soul from the terror of the unknown. When you no longer hold your life tightly in your hands, death no longer feels like a theft. It feels like return. 4. Fear grows where the future feels uncertain. The person who does not know God personally fears stepping into eternity because they do not know whom they will meet there. But Margaret Mary saw Jesus reveal his heart so clearly, so intimately, that she wrote, "Those who love my heart will recognize me without fear when they die." This sentence contains the entire essence of why certain people rarely fear death. They already know the one who awaits them. And here is the mystery few consider. Death strips away everything, except the relationship you have built with God. For those who barely know him, death feels like entering a room alone. For those who have loved him deeply, death feels like stepping into familiar arms. Margaret Mary understood that fear of death is not solved by medical security, life extension, or philosophical coping. It is solved by relationship. Specifically, by entering into the heart of Jesus so fully that the soul begins to feel at home there, so fully that heaven feels like continuity, not disruption. This is why she insisted that devotion to the Sacred Heart was not sentimental piety, it was preparation for eternity. And the kind of person who rarely fears death is the one already living in the refuge Christ promised. There is a reason that some people die in peace, even when their bodies are frail, their futures uncertain, and their earthly life incomplete. It is not because they escaped suffering. It is not because they had guarantees. It is because long before death arrived, they encountered a love stronger than fear. This was the foundation of Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque's spirituality. Her visions of the Sacred Heart of Jesus were not given to impress the world, but to transform the way people face eternity. Jesus did not show her his heart merely as a symbol. He revealed it as a place where fear dissolves. Let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that being near them dissolved your anxieties almost instantly? If that is possible with human love, imagine what is possible with divine love. Perfect, unchanging, unconditional. Fear of death shrinks in the presence of such love. It cannot survive where trust is alive. This is what Margaret Mary discovered. The person who rarely fears death is the one who has already encountered the heart of Christ in this life. And here is why that encounter changes everything. 1. They have seen death through the eyes of Christ. In her visions, Margaret Mary saw Jesus not as a distant judge, but as a bridegroom waiting for his beloved. To such a soul, death is not an interruption. It is union. When you believe you are moving towards someone who desires you, fear becomes anticipation. 2. They have experienced mercy before judgment. Margaret Mary spoke often of the burning mercy of Christ's heart, a mercy that embraces human weakness rather than condemning it. The soul that has tasted mercy no longer trembles at the thought of appearing before God. Death does not threaten those who already know the generosity of the one who awaits them. 3. They have allowed themselves to be loved. This is the greatest secret of all. People who fear death deeply often have never let themselves be fully loved by God. They believe in him, yes, they pray, yes, but they have not allowed themselves to be held by him. Margaret Mary did. And that surrender changed the way she lived, and the way she would eventually die. 4. They no longer see death as loss to the world. Death takes everything. To the soul united with Christ, death gives everything. It gives rest to the weary, completion to the longing, healing to the wounded, home to the homeless-hearted. Margaret Mary wrote that the soul united to the Sacred Heart will desire nothing but the moment of seeing him fully. Imagine reaching a point where the greatest fear of humanity becomes the greatest desire of your heart. That is the transformation the Sacred Heart brings. 5. They have already begun eternal life. For Margaret Mary, eternity did not begin at death. It began the day she opened her heart to the burning love of Christ. Death, then, was not an ending. It was the full unveiling of the love she already knew. The person who lives in the Sacred Heart experiences death not as a rupture, but as revelation. This is why the fear of death dissolves in certain people, not because of bravery, not because of denial, but because love has gone deeper than fear can reach. There is a quiet truth hidden in the lives of the saints, one that many overlook. It is not their miracles, their penances, or their heroic sacrifices that gave them peace at the hour of death. It was something far simpler and far more interior. They lived in God long before they died in Him. Fear of death grows in the soul that remains attached to this world. But the soul that has already found its treasure elsewhere walks toward eternity without trembling. Let me ask you something gently. What part of you clings most tightly to this life? Is it your plans, your relationships, your comforts, your regrets, your unfinished dreams? Whatever the heart clings to, the heart fears losing. This is why certain people approach death with dread, not because death is dark, but because their hearts are still anchored in a place death cannot reach. Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque knew this with piercing clarity. Her entire spirituality was built on a single movement of the soul. Detach from everything that cannot follow you into eternity, and attach yourself to the heart that will never let you go. This was not philosophy, it was experience. She learned that when the soul falls deeply in love with Christ, its fears begin to reorder themselves. The fear of suffering decreases, the fear of failure softens, the fear of judgment transforms into hope, and the fear of death loses its sting. Why? Because the soul realizes something profound. 1. The one who awaits you at death is the same one who carried you in life. Death does not introduce you to a stranger. It unveils someone you have known in whispers, in sacraments, in prayer, in mercy. Margaret Mary wrote that the Sacred Heart becomes a familiar dwelling for the soul that seeks Him. If God is home, then dying is returning, not departing. 2. The soul learns to see life as preparation, not possession. Those who fear death often try to own their life. They clutch at time, achievements, youth, opportunities, as if identity depends on holding everything together. But Margaret Mary discovered a radical peace. Life becomes less frightening when you stop trying to keep it. When the soul sees life as a journey rather than a fortress, death no longer feels like an invasion, it feels like arrival. 3. The Sacred Heart heals the wounds that make death frightening. Many people fear death, not because of the afterlife, but because of their past. Unforgiven sins, unresolved guilt, unspoken grief, unhealed memories. Margaret Mary understood that the heart of Jesus is the only place where these wounds lose their power. A healed heart does not fear meeting the healer. 4. Love reorders the meaning of separation. Death separates you from the world, but not from Christ. For the soul anchored in the Sacred Heart, death is not a subtraction, but an expansion. You do not lose love. You enter it. 5. The soul begins to desire what once frightened it. Margaret Mary wrote that the deeper the soul enters into Christ's heart, the more it longs for the moment when nothing will stand between them. This longing does not eliminate suffering, but it transforms the meaning of suffering. Death becomes the culmination, not the catastrophe. This is why certain people rarely fear death. Their hearts have already migrated toward heaven long before their bodies follow. There is a mystery at the heart of the Christian life that few take time to contemplate. The same love that sanctifies daily life is the love that removes fear at the hour of death. Death becomes terrifying only when love has not yet reached its fullness. But once love matures, once it roots itself deeply in God, the soul begins to interpret everything differently, including its final breath. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever noticed that the more you love someone, the less you fear stepping into the unknown if it means being with them? And have you ever noticed how fear dissolves when love becomes total? This, Margaret Mary understood, is why certain people rarely fear death. Perfect love casts out fear, not because death becomes smaller, but because God becomes larger. And the Sacred Heart of Jesus is where this transformation takes place. Margaret Mary's entire mission was to reveal that God's heart is not a symbol, not an idea, not an emotion, but a refuge, a place where fear loses its authority because love holds the final word. Here is how love transforms the final moment into freedom. 1. Love reorients the soul toward belonging, not loss. People who fear death imagine everything they will lose: their relationships, their memories, their opportunities. But the soul in love with Christ does not focus on what is ending. It focuses on who is waiting. Death no longer feels like separation. It feels like fulfillment. Margaret Mary said the soul that rests in the Sacred Heart will desire nothing but to fly to Him. 2. Love cleanses the conscience. Fear of death often masks fear of judgment, fear of facing one's past, fear of what has not been confessed or healed. But when the soul lives in the Sacred Heart, mercy becomes its home. There is nothing left to hide, nothing left to defend, nothing left unresolved. A clean conscience makes death gentle. 3. Love strengthens trust. You cannot fear entering the hands of someone you trust completely. Margaret Mary taught that the person who entrusts their life to the Sacred Heart day after day slowly grows incapable of fearing God's will, even at the hour of death. Trust carries the soul where fear cannot. 4. Love makes eternity desirable. Those who do not know Christ personally cling to this world because it is all they have ever known intimately. But Margaret Mary lived with one foot already in heaven. The more she loved Jesus, the more she saw that death was not a thief. It was a threshold to deeper union. Love makes the unknown familiar. 5. Love loosens. Every earthly chain, fear binds. Love frees. People who die afraid often die holding on to something: regret, anger, unfinished forgiveness, unyielded control. But people who have been purified by love die with open hands. Nothing holds them back. Nothing frightens them forward. They walk into eternity the same way they walked with Christ through life, with trust. This is why Saint Margaret Mary insisted that devotion to the Sacred Heart was not sentimental. It was preparation. Preparation to live without fear. Preparation to die without terror. Preparation to meet God not as judge, but as the one the soul has loved its entire life. This is why this kind of person rarely fears death, because love has already made them free.